he does just that. In the process, President Trump finds 38 additional documents. He tells the Department of Justice. Very next day, the FBI comes to his home, and he turns them over. Everything they asked him to do, he did. And then what's the Justice Department do? August 8th, last year, they raid President Trump's home.
Other Republican lawmakers had similar questions.
They see the DOJ, of course, aggressively prosecuting President Biden's chief political rival, Mr. Trump, while at the same time, they see slow walking and special treatment given to the president's son. Why has the Justice Department dragged this investigation out for so long?
Mr. Weiss was a long-time career prosecutor. President Trump appointed him as...
You're not answering the question. Is that standard procedure? Should it take that long to make such a simple determination?
Garland maintained that Trump-appointed AG David Weiss had full authority to investigate Hunter Biden, and that he had not questioned Weiss on how that was being done. Meanwhile, Democrat lawmakers are saying this.
Mr. Jordan, who has evaded the subpoena for 500 days, has the nerve to have this committee hearing, whose sole purpose is to defend Donald Trump and to cast aspersions on the investigation of Donald Trump by the Justice Department.
Representative Jeff Van Drew called attention to agents investigating Catholic churches.
Yes, the idea that someone with my family background would discriminate against any religion is so outrageous, so absurd.
Mr. Attorney General, it was your FBI that did this.
Some Democrat lawmakers applauded Garland and the DOJ.
Well, there is no doubt that the Department of Justice under General Garland has the ultimate of integrity. There is no political bias, no bias
bullshit
toward anyone because of their power or their wealth.
At the end of the day, if you hear him very carefully, what he's saying is nobody in this country is above the law.
Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Professors, because China wants us to be educated in Mandarin or about China. China is doing this because they want us to think of China, of the People's Republic of China, as a normal country, like we think of France or Chile or Portugal or South Korea, democracies, happy democracies, and not like what China is, which is a dictatorship that puts people in prison, that jails Jimmy Lai, China's most famous political prisoner, who's been thrown at the age of 75 into prison. He was an independent publisher, and who's in solitary confinement. China doesn't want our children or adults to know this. It wants us to think that they're not an adversary, they're not a hostile power. It's just a normal country. That's not the case. They would be lying.
And Mike, given that, it seems some have pushed back, saying this, especially this hearing about the Chinese Communist Party's influence in education, is actually hurting the Chinese diaspora in the States. With your example of Jimmy Lai, help us understand how this is actually targeting the Chinese Communist Party and not the Chinese people.
Yeah, I couldn't understand what the Democrats were saying or their witness. It was really baffling to me. I don't speak of a Chinese diaspora. We have Americans. They're Americans of Chinese origin, and they have the right of every American. I myself was born overseas, and I consider myself an American. This is not, about them. This is about the country that oppresses them before they came here. You talk to Americans born in China, and they're the most vociferous in denouncing the horrible communist dictatorship of China. I just could not. I was dumbfounded that the Democrats in that committee made that comparison. We have to get serious about the threat of the PRC, of the People's Republic of China. We have to get serious about the Chinese Communist Party. We cannot have elected American representatives carrying water for the CCP.
And now, Mike, speaking of the threat, it seems there are some actions being taken following the hearing. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik co-led legislation titled the Class Act. That's to counter the Chinese Communist Party's influence in the education sector. What would you like to see more of in this regards?
Look, normally I don't want the federal government to be involved in educational matters. They have no role in it, but this is a matter of national security. This is a matter of a foreign power trying to insinuate itself into the education of our children and of our university students, and in the case of Hollywood, of regular Americans, the viewing public. So I think that there's a role here for Congress. There's a federal role here, very definitely. I'd like to see a ban and collaboration between U.S. entities, U.S. institutions, and entities that belong to the Public Security Ministry of China, which does intelligence, or to the Defense Ministry, or to any PRC institutions that do intelligence or military.
Mike Gonzalez, thank you so much for your time. Groomed. There are cases of rape, trafficking, of kids being pushed into irreversible gender-altering surgeries during developmental years, all without parental consent or even knowledge. For so long, we've assumed that the state has our best interests at heart as citizens, that public education has remained largely unchanged, except for lowering standards. But schools are rapidly evolving. The focus is shifting from academics to social reform. The California Assembly just passed a bill granting judges authority to remove child custody from parents for refusing to affirm their kids' gender identity. And the United Nations has been pushing for explicit sex education all the way down to kindergarten. Who has rights over your child once they enter school? What are the origins of state education? When and where did it begin? And why are parents relinquishing their rights to their own children's well-being? Are they being intimidated? How far is too far? Is this state-sanctioned kidnapping? Our guest today will help us unravel this dark history and shed light on what can be done about it. Time to meet our panel. Our guests today are Alex Newman, an award-winning journalist, educator, speaker, and consultant who puts his faith first in everything. Educated abroad, he speaks several languages, and his work has taken him around the globe. He's written for a wide array of publications in the U.S. and internationally, including
really putting a stake in the ground and making the case that education really should not be seen as the responsibility of the civil government. It is and properly must remain the responsibility of the family government and the individual. And so over the last couple hundred years in the United States, we've really gotten confused about this issue. We've gotten to the point now where it's just commonly accepted that government should be responsible for educating children and even now adults with college and so on. We think that it's time to rethink this. We think that it's time to reframe the debate. And as an ultimate objective, we do believe we should go back to the system that made this country great in the first place, a non-governmental system of education, primarily led by families, maybe with a supplemental role for the church.
Yeah, fascinating. And also, Tom, I'd like to ask you about the work that you've been doing in this area. You've just led an international school walkout called Unteach the Overreach. Could you tell me about how that went?
Yeah, it went really well. We had folks all across the world, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, etc., keep their kids out of school or take other actions on September 14th yesterday. And the day before, we had a rally in Frederick County, Maryland, to kind of promote that idea that really it's parents to be in charge of education. It shouldn't be the government. Parents' rights need to be respected.
And where a lot of this is being felt really is within the homes, within families themselves. And Darlene, you've been speaking to families all about how they've been affected by these issues. What have you found in those conversations?
Well, I think parents are extremely concerned, since the pandemic, and they got a glimpse into what was happening in the classroom, during online classes. They've become very concerned about what's being taught to their children. And, as we've seen in Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, these parents have started to push back against the state, trying to take control, basically, of their children. They've had enough.
And absolutely, I'm sure this is being felt in many different ways across the nation. For yourself, Alex, you've said that schools are on fire, that it's time to get the children out. What is it that makes you have such an absolute stance on this?
Well, I would actually say it's even worse than fire. Fire is just the best analogy I could think of, but in a local school board and asking them for some minor changes. This is a time for grabbing your children and running out of that building as fast as your legs can carry you. The well-being of your children is at stake.
And there's so many ways that this happens, but it does come through in a systematic way, for sure, that we can point to. Darlene, you've been investigating the diversity, equity, inclusion, also CRT that's being taught in schools. What have you found in your investigations?
Well, it is widespread. There's really no place, I think, left in America that, this hasn't infiltrated. Even in red states such as Texas and Florida, these states are, very conservative, and yet you have schools that are, taking this into their curriculum. They're incorporating it in different areas. So it's not like it's a class that parents can say, hey, I don't want my kids to learn about this. It's just being basically inserted into almost every subject, even in questions that they might have on tests, for example, in college, about LGBTQ people who adhere to that, ideology. All of that has been basically inserted into the classroom, whether it be K through 12 or college.
And so in a way, it's difficult for parents, for sure, to spot, but being so subtle, it may also be difficult for children to even recognize it's just happening to them throughout their day, in a way. Tom, I'd like to ask you, you've started a charter school that has been ranked #1 in Maryland by U.S. News. What motivated you to start that school, and how's it going?
Yeah, so back when I was doing that in 2013, it was really about reading and math and some of the core subjects that the schools weren't teaching well. So we wanted to teach using scientifically based reading instruction, for example. We wanted to have math books that had lots of math in them. Believe it or not, there are actually math books that don't have a lot of math in them, and the same for history and science. So we were really motivated by the academic side of the house, and that was challenging enough. But now, as the other house has said, we've moved on beyond that being the main issues. Now they're pushing into gender ideology in kindergarten. Is scheduled for next year in our school system, and it's already being taught in the middle school. So they're teaching disputed ideology as fact. And so, we don't think that's right. And unfortunately, in Maryland, even as a charter school, you're not allowed to opt out of that. The charter schools don't have the freedom here that they have everywhere else. So that will be coming, unfortunately, to the charter school that I started as well.
So it sounds like there are challenges across the board, but there are also a lot of ways that people are trying to make change, as we've seen from all of your efforts. Such a compelling conversation. We'll have more of this when we come back after the break.
Push to incorporate comprehensive sex ed into schools around the world. In the United States, we've also been hearing some similar things from groups such as Planned Parenthood and teachers' unions. These sex education standards now are incorporating the idea of consent, which is something that is, very foreign, I would think, to most parents. They wouldn't imagine that sexual consent would be something that schools would be teaching their children. But that is indeed what the UN wants.
And in a way, it sounds fairly innocent, teaching consent. It's telling people that they can say no. What about it is concerning to you?
Well, if you think about it, they're trying to separate parental rights from this issue of sex in children, which brings many experts to believe that, this is all a huge push towards sexualization of children and giving them the ability to say yes to sex. So when you start pushing consent and saying, oh, you have to have consent to have sex, well, that puts that idea into a child's head that you can consent to sex. So, and of course, that removes any type of parental oversight into something like that.
And once that idea is there in a child, once any idea is planted so young, it can be hard to change that. So it's quite concerning. And though this kind of effect on children, this happening through the schools, has been happening for quite some time. Alex, you've written about the historical progress of this through the schools. You've named 3 historical figures in particular. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah, this agenda of sexualizing children actually has its roots in Marxism. And it's actually not an ends in and of itself. It's a means to an end. So they figured out about 100 years ago that if you could start sexualizing children, planting these ideas in their mind, you could use that to break down their moral fabric, break down the moral values and the religious traditions that the parents were trying to instill in them, and get them sexually active, which of course will have a catastrophic effect on their future families, on their future lives. The research on this is very well established. And again, the reason they wanted to do it, Karl Marx was very, very clear, even in the Communist Manifesto. He said, we want all children educated by government in free public schools. He also was very, very clear about the agenda to dismantle the family. In fact, he argued that women should be held in common, that the nuclear family, the monogamous marriage was problematic. It was a bourgeois institution. And so this sexualization of children, and it is international, the UNESCO, the UN's education agency, put out the Global International Technical Guidance on Sex Education over 5 years ago. And they want 5-year-olds to learn things that I wouldn't be comfortable with a 16 or 17-year-old learning. I mean, just absolute wickedness. But again, this is about breaking down the family and breaking down moral values. Sexualizing the children is a means to that end.
What kinds of things are we looking at here that they're teaching?
Well, I don't want to get too graphic because some of this is really bad, but we're talking when these children are 5 years old, they want to start teaching them about masturbation. They want to start teaching them about sexual pleasure. They want to start teaching them about this very, very preposterous concept of gender being a social construct, being something that an individual can choose for himself or for herself. They also want to start normalizing this idea of different types of families with, 2 moms or 3 dads, or 2 moms, 3 dads, and 2 cats. So this is very, very problematic. Again, it's a war on the family. And even the war on the family itself is not the end, right? It is a means to an even bigger end, which is the overthrow of the existing social and political and economic and moral order, so that it could be replaced with a new totalitarian system, as we saw in the countries that first implemented this, like communist Hungary 100 years ago.
Right. I'd like to come back to that. That is such an important point about the potential eventual ends here. What I'd like to ask is, a lot of this comes across as information in the schools. The way it's being taught or framed is just purely information. But would you say, Tom, that this could be grooming? Or is it sexualization?
Well, for me, I just think it's inaccurate, right? So my focus has been on the gender ideology part of it. And so when they're setting policies, for example, in Frederick County Public Schools and schools all over, where they define gender identity as something that is fixed, for example. So if a child tells you at age 5 that they, feel like they're a girl, then the school just accepts that as truth and is basically largely inflexible, like it's never going to change. And the research on this, there are 12 studies on it that we cited in a policy that several of us proposed here in Frederick County, shows that for most kids, as they grow up, they become comfortable in their natal sex. And so for me, I'm coming more from a question of accuracy, and it's not really, what the schools are teaching is not really reflecting what the science shows. And, most of those kids that do desist, they often become gay more often than not. So my concern is that they're confusing kids that may ultimately be same-sex attracted.
So in a way, it's denying some of the science that we already know about what kids do end up deciding that they are if they're let to their natural course. Darlene, you've reported on potential grooming in this area. What have you found?
Well, I think that there's something out there that I think that a lot of people might not know about, and it's called queer theory. Queer theory basically has its roots in gender fluidity. You hear that term a lot, and kids thinking that they can be whatever gender they want to, the flavor of the day kind of thing. That's coming from this, and this again has some Marxist roots in it. Queer theory really is about disrupting social norms. It's about destroying norms and flipping them on their head. If you think that pedophilia is bad and not something that society accepts, then queer theory would absolutely accept that. They would say, or queer theorists would say, that this is the route we need to go because of the system the way we have it now if you are a straight, male or a straight female, that you have the power. And so it's all about power and flipping that on its head and destroying the family.
Fascinating discussion. We're right in the middle of our deep dive on parents' rights. Thank you so much to all of our panelists right here. We'll be right back after the break.
Which, again, this is the very essence of socialism, where the government funds, controls, and even operates the means of production for its purposes, for the collective purposes, rather than the purposes of the individual. But if you look back historically at how schools have been used by socialists, by communists, by totalitarians, it's basically a 100-year horror show. Adolf Hitler was a very, very good example of this. This is a guy who was obsessed with the idea of indoctrinating children. He repeatedly wrote and spoke about the importance of capturing the minds of the next generation. And so he actually became the first leader in world history to criminalize home education. And of course, many governments are now following in those footsteps. We saw what happened in the Soviet Union. We saw what happened in Eastern Europe. We see what's happening to this day in places like Cuba and places like Venezuela, where the government education system has completely left behind any pretense of providing an education and has become 100% an indoctrination system to indoctrinate children into the official ideology of the regime, to break down previous traditions, morals, religions, etc. It's what we saw in China during the communist takeover, and it continues to this day. It's what we saw in virtually every totalitarian system of the last 100 years. And unfortunately, totalitarians, even in this country, have understood the importance of that. In fact, the founding father of the American public school system, at least the man widely regarded as the founding father of the American public school system, John Dewey, was a self-proclaimed socialist. This is a guy who went to the Soviet Union and couldn't say enough good things about the Soviet system. That's what we're dealing with here. They just haven't gotten quite as radical, perhaps, as we saw maybe in communist China 60 or 50 years ago.
And there's so much that we can learn from looking abroad and looking through history at these communist regimes, for example, or fascist regimes. One of the aspects within communism is often the regime will turn parents and children against each other. And how do we see that kind of effect taking place within our own school system, would you say?
It is happening so clearly at this point. In fact, we were just speaking on the transgender issue. This is a perfect example of this. They're telling these kids, your parents might not be a safe space, but you can pick whatever gender you want, and we'll keep that from your parents. This is suggesting to children that they can't trust their parents. So the government then is inserting itself as the protector, as the liberator of children from their oppressive bourgeois parents. Unbelievably dangerous. This is exactly what Adolf Hitler did. This is exactly what Chairman Mao did. This is exactly what the communists in the Soviet Union did. They try to drive a wedge between parents and children because this interrupts the transmission belt then. The culture, the values, the religious faith that's passed down from generation to generation is now being interrupted. Now parents are hostile to children. And we've seen where this ends as well. I mean, if you want to look at the end point here, look at these totalitarian systems of the past. What ends up happening after a few years of this radical indoctrination is children will literally turn their parents over to government knowing that they will be tortured, executed, or sent to a re-education camp. Yes. I don't want to sound alarmist, but that's the direction we're headed right now in this country.
Indeed. Well, that is horrific and alarming. In fact, though, there are a lot of actions, as we've seen already, that people are taking to try to remedy this. Tom, we mentioned your international walkout. You've had people around the world, I assume, taking a stand on this. What have you seen in terms of the international reach?
Yeah, I would say that around the world, parents are waking up to the fact that the schools are really not acting in their best interest, especially when it comes to like keeping secrets about their child's mental health conditions, right? Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. It's on page 511 of the DSM-5, which is the manual that psychologists use. And, parents should know about that if their child is gender questioning or has concerns. Most parents, when they hear that their child has concerns, they're not doing anything bad to them. They're not kicking them out of the house or in any way being unsafe with them. They love them more. They embrace them more. They engage with them more, take more family trips. They really try to help their children, as all good parents do. And so we're seeing across the world, for instance, Canada, next week, they are going to have a 1 million-person walkout on schools because of these ideas that, really are not in the child's best interest. Parents are the best protector of their children, and that's what we need to get back.
Right, but it does seem like there's a groundswell there that you're definitely plugged into. And also back within the U.S., there's the Parents' Bill of Rights. Though, Darlene, as you reported on, the Freedom Caucus rejected it this year from the House of Representatives. Why do you think that was, Darlene?
I think that's kind of difficult to say. I think that, you have different factions in the Republican Party. I think they're all kind of geared towards the same thing, though, of trying to get more control for parents, especially in schools. But I think the way to go about that is really what's in dispute.
I would like shortly to warn people from upcoming danger for humanity. The World Health Organization wants all countries to sign an agreement on handing over the authority to declare a pandemic, procure vaccine and drugs. It would be healthier and safer for humanity to sign an agreement with the Colombian drug cartel. They know all about drugs for sure. During the COVID pandemic, World Health Organization only told lies. It should be declared a terroristic organization. They lied that is a new and known virus, that is possible to make an effective vaccine, that the vaccine is 82% effective, that it protects against serious illness and deaths, that all, of course, were foolish and lies. Today, World Health Organization is more dangerous for humanity than World Economic Forum. Thank you.